Enkhuizen has grown enormously in the Dutch Golden Ages. A small fisherman's town had grown into one of the largest ports in the Netherlands. In early history, the people of Enkhuizen were already busy with fishing, mostly for herring. That's why the historic harbour has been preserved to remind us of that history. This documentary will take you on a tour through historic Enkhuizen. Along the way we'll show you places, buildings and areas that have changed in form, function and meaning. As you can see on the maps, the city has changed over time. The old town overlaps in the newer version of the city. Today we'll start at one of the oldest places, the Venedi. Spices, cloth and tradeware were stored in the storage house. Nowadays it's an Irish pub. The street you see used to be a canal with a dead end. It basically was an open sewer. It must have been a shitty time to live here. In fact, the smell was so horrible people started to complain. As a result, the canal was filled in. Nowadays it's one of the main car routes through the city. Some people are voting for a reopening of the canal, but that would prove disastrous, as you'll destroy one of the main traffic routes, as you can see. After closing the canal, the street was decorated with patches of foliage, turning the old canal into a boulevard in the heart of town. Up ahead we turn towards the Sluis, another canal, but this time with a sluice. Once again it was filled.
Not a single building you're going to see in these pictures exists anymore. Everything pre-19th century was torn down. The smell was just as shitty at the Venedi. The street level is higher than the sidewalk height. This is a leftover from the time the canals were still around. The heightened part was to prevent the flooding of the canals into the street. We will continue our trip down memory lane by visiting one of the old harbors. The water once held ships and boats. The neat little park, that was where business was taking place. No pretty trees, no, huge warehouses. That was all the rage back then. At the end of the water, a cannonsmith was doing his business, providing the ships with their much needed defenses against our seafaring miners, the Spanish and the British. This wall used to block out the sea. Nowadays, the sea is no more. German tourists take over this field at least twice a year. A camping is situated here, accommodating a large part of the tourist population. Some of the diehards already arrived. This opening of the wall was used as a gate. Wooden beams were dropped in the slit and stacked to keep the water out in times of stormy weather. This part of the wall still retains its old function, proudly standing strong over 400 years. To us, this wall means safety. Houses in the harbor were relatively expensive. Many of the rich lived there. This building was one of the major defensive structures of the city. It served as a prison as well. Fun fact, the prison would flood at times of high water. I guess you can predict that not a lot of prisoners were too happy about that. You can still see the scratches on the wooden doors, beams, and the brick walls. Nowadays, it's a theater. Boy, the 17th century wasn't that fun at all.
In the shopping district, the original orphanage was torn down in the 19th century. The facade was spared and reattached to a newer building, 10 meters behind its original spot. Nowadays, the fence marks its former place in the street. And a former monastery has been spared. The storefront was placed around the outer wall. Today, there's a sports store inside the monastery. We're nearing the end. We'll show you the former outer wall of the town, or at least what's left of it. This piece of history is all what's left of the old wall. The square used to be a watchtower. The wall stood along the water. Behind it, the land was used by farmers for cattle and agriculture. The water was used by farmers to transport their tradeware and cattle towards the farms in the inner city and the warehouses. This farm is one of the 5 remaining farms in the city. In the present, the canals are used for recreation. Note that the buildings you see were all built during the 17th century, when the city was expanded beyond its former walls. We are currently standing at the vesting, the bulwark of the city. The area you are seeing now is a suburb of the city, former farmland used by farmers within the city. Pretty, eh? Our last shot, one of the last gates into the city canals. Currently, it's a monument used by hobby farmers. They're using it as a shed for their tools. There you have it. The city of Enkhuizen has seen some pretty big changes over the last few centuries. But even with a suburb, changes still happen within the historic core, altering the form, function and meaning of buildings, streets and squares. But no matter how important the future of a city is, to truly understand the importance of change, it's always relevant to look back at the past.